What we're going to do now is to design the business logic for this sales record application, and we are also going to write some database query methods for the application. We're also going to write the data structure for the application. The data structure will consist of the bin, that is a class, a Java class that has getters and setters. So now, if you recall, we had created in the previous videos, some videos ago, we created a database using the database DAO class. So we created a database and a table for the sales record containing these following fields: serial number, invoice number, description, price, sold, customer name. And if you also recall, our field here in the dialog, these text fields, when I'm talking about fields, I'm talking about these text fields now. These text fields are supposed to be used to capture the information that will be inserted into these tables in the database table. Okay, you can also recall that from services to databases, we have JavaScript 7x on sales records too. If we can use NetBeans to connect to it, that will connect to our embedded database, and we can see the tables that we had. Okay, we had only one table, sales record, and here are the fields: the serial number, invoice number, description, price, sold, and customer name. So here are the fields that we had here, and we had these fields. So what we want to do is to create a class that will represent a sample record, okay, or any record, a class that will represent any record that is supposed to be inserted into this sales records table. Now, when I mean by a record, of course, you know, in a database that a record is okay, let's view the data. So if you know, in a database, a record is one row of information in the database table. Actually, when we select all from after sales records, it's supposed to show a table, but I am not seeing it. Okay, I was having trouble there trying to see my sales records table. So like I said, okay, to fix that, I had to go to tools or window. I had to go to window and then click on reset windows, and that will reset the Windows view of the NetBeans. So I can go to services and then right click and then view data, and yeah, so this is what I was looking for. So this is the table. Now you can see that the fields are the columns. The fields of the table: serial number, invoice number, description, price, sold, customer name. They are all called fields in JDBC, in SQL, and they are also columns. You can call them columns. So what we want to do is to write a class that will simulate these fields, that will have a class that will have fields too. And when I'm talking about fields, I'm talking about variables now that will represent the columns. Okay, so I hope you understand what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, to do that, let me minimize this, and to do that, okay, I'll have to disconnect from the database so that next time we want to connect, we should be able to connect. So I'm gonna go back to project, then under project, I'm going to create a class in this com.xyneex.sales package. So I right click and say new Java class. Then I'm gonna name the class to be sales record. That's gonna be the name of the class. Then I'm gonna click on finish, and let's wait for it to finish. And here is the name of the class. So sorry, here's the declaration of the class. So here, like I was saying, we expect to have fields that will represent columns in the database. Okay, the columns here: serial number, invoice number, description, price sold, and customer name. Okay, so what we're going to do is to declare those variables to be the fields. So here I'm going to declare int serial number. Okay, and I'm going to declare string invoice number. Then I'm going to declare string description. Then I'm going to declare double price sold. Then I'm going to declare customer name to be a string. Alright, so now one may ask, how do we know what kind of data types that is appropriate for this particular fields that I'm declaring? Because this particular field I use an int, these two ones I use a string, and this one I use double, and this one I use a string. So why am I choosing that? Alright, and why you should choose int for serial number or string for this and all that? It's just simple common sense. If you take a look at the serial numbers are something that we declared in the database DAO to be not null, and it should be integers. So in our database table we expect to store integers, and we want them to be the primary key that will be generated always as identity. So that's why I declared the serial number to be an int, okay, in the Java data type. Then back to the database DAO, you can see that the invoice number is going to be a varchar, because invoice numbers may contain letters and a preceding zeros and all that. So that's why we have to store it as varchar. And of course a varchar is a string. Okay, the representation of a string in a database is a varchar. The description, the description of what you are going to sell, the sales record, is also a varchar, so it should also be declared as a string. Then the price sold is going to be money, that is amount of money. So an amount of money runs into the first amount in the decimal part, so that's why we use double. And then the customer name, of course, that will have to be a varchar, because characters are involved in customer names. So you can see that's why we are using string here for the customer name. Alright, so that's why when you want to choose your data types for your fields, you need to think of the kind of data that you are going to save, and you also need to think about the kind of data that you had declared in the database structure, and they should agree with each other. Okay, so these are the fields in the sales record class. Now I'm going to create a default no argument constructor, because one of the rules of creating a class that is going to be a bin is that the class should have a default no argument constructor. So in order to create a default no argument constructor, I'm gonna press alternate insert, and that's going to bring up this menu for me to choose constructor. So I choose constructor to generate constructor, and I click on it, and it says select fields to be initialized by the constructor. So I'm not going to initialize any of these fields, so I'm going to click on generate, and this has generated the constructor for me. And then the next thing I want to do is to generate getter and setter methods for this sales record. So I'm going to press alternate insert again, or if you can't press alternate insert, you can simply right click on that place, and then you go to insert code, which is the same as alternate insert. So alternate plus insert. So I'm gonna click on insert code, and then here's the menu that we've been using so far. Then I'm gonna click on getter and setter, and then I'm gonna select the sales record class so that all the fields are selected, because I want to create getters and setters for all these fields. Then I'm gonna click on encapsulate fields. The encapsulate fields are going to make all these fields to be private. That's how to make encapsulation in OOP in Java. So I'm gonna click on generate, and so here we are. You can see all the getter and setter methods have been generated automatically for us. Alright, so that's how to create a bin that will serve as the data structure for our sales record application. The next thing that we're going to do here is to write some programs that will help us to insert this data that will be entered here. When someone clicks on save, it will insert it into the database. So let's go back to project, and what I'm going to teach you here is how to handle business logic in an application, not just a desktop application, but any Java application. it is important for you to separate your business logic from your view logic. And what I mean by that is that the program or the method that we're going to write to insert this record into the database shouldn't be written in this class. Shouldn't be written in this class, this add sales dialog class. So it should be written in another class, so that our business concerns, our business logic concerns should be separated from our view logic concerns, because this class is, whatever information we have here has to do with the view logic. Okay, so in other words, I'm using the MVC approach of programming in OOP. So if you don't understand, just go and look it up, MVC approach. Alright, so we're going to do that by creating another class inside this com.xyneex.sales package, and then I'm gonna right click to do that, and I select new, then I select Java class, then I'm gonna name the class to be sales DAO. Alright, so I'm gonna click on finish, and here we go. We've had a class in the package com.xyneex.sales, and name of the class is public class sales DAO. Alright, so what are we gonna do in this class? Now what we're going to do in this class is that this class is not going to be representing any data structure. It's just simply going to handle some business logic. Okay, so the methods that we're going to write here are going to be static methods, because we will not need to instantiate an instance of this class. Alright, so one of the methods, or the first method that we need to write here in this class, is a method that will insert the record into the database. And the method will take as its argument a sales record a sales record object. Okay, and what I mean by sales record object, an instance of this very class here. Alright, so let's do that. Excuse me, let me just shift this guy over here so I can be swapping easily from this class and this class here. Okay, so here's the method. So I'm going to declare the method as public. Method has to be public so that it can be accessible. Public static void. No, it's not going to be a void. I would like the method to be a boolean, so that it can tell us that the record has been inserted or not. Remember, we want to insert the record into the database, so it should tell us whether the record has been inserted successfully or not. So we are going to call the method insert sales record. Okay, and this method should take as its argument a sales record object. Sales record. So here we go. This method is going to take as its argument a sales record object. So what are we going to do in this method? We have to have a plan. How do we go ahead in inserting the sales record into the database? Now, if you recall, we have first of all, we need to open up a connection to the database. You can recall JDBC steps. We open up a connection to the database, we create an SQL statement, and then we execute the statement. Okay, and then when we execute the statement, we get the result and then test whether it has been inserted successfully or not. So how do we get a connection? That's the first thing we need to do. In order to get a connection to the database, we need to write a method to do that. We're not going to write the method here in the sales DAO class. Rather, we're going to write the method in the database DAO class. So let's take a look at what we have here. Now, if you recall this class, we use this class to handle the data access object for the entire database. Here we had a field for the database properties, which is actually going to contain information that is read from the properties file, if you can recall what we did in the previous earlier video tutorials of this series. And then we had a field for the database connection, which is an instance of java.sql.connection. And then we had a field for the database URL, and we also had a field that is containing the SQL that is used to create the sales record. Here is the constructor that will instantiate the database DAO class, and we had a method that will load the properties for us from the configuration.properties file. And then we also had a method that will load the database driver for us, a method that will check if the database exists or not, a method that will get the database location, a method that will create the database. This is what created the database for us when we ran it for the first time. Here, this one will get the database URL for us, this one here, and then here is the method that will create the sales record table, and which we use, if you can recall, we use this one to create the sales record table successfully. So what's missing here in the database DAO is a method that will enable us to open up a connection to the database. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to write that method, but we will need to use the get database URL method in that method. So here, this is how it's going to be. Let's go ahead and do that. Our method is going to have the following signatures: public connection, because we are going to return a connection object, get database connection, and of course, whenever you want to get a database connection, you have to do or handle a SQL exception. But I'm not going to just declare throws SQL exception without showing you why and who is actually throwing those SQL exceptions yet. So let's go ahead and what we're going to do, three things here. We're simply going to reinitialize the connection object, this.db connection, which is the field we have in this class, to be equal to null, so that there's no connection for now. And then we're gonna say this.db URL. The database URL is we're gonna retrieve that with this.get database URL, and that will give us the URL to the database. And then we're gonna use the connection and the database. We're going to use the properties. These properties here that we have here, this properties field, db properties. So we're gonna use this db properties field and the URL to open up a connection to the database. So we can simply say connection con equals connection con equals driver manager dot get connection, and we're going to use the get connection method that takes two arguments, the URL and the properties. So, and NetBeans is smart enough to put that for us. So we say connection con is equals to driver manager dot get connection. We pass in the URL and the connection and the properties, and then there's no need for us to redeclare connection again. So we can simply say this dot db connection. Forgot that we already have one here, a field that is an instance of connection. So we can say this dot db connection is equals to driver manager dot get connection, and then we will simply say return this dot db connection. Okay, but now I changed my mind, because as you can see, this equals to this. So why don't we simply just say return return driver manager dot get connection. All right, so not return equals, but return driver manager dot get connection. Okay, so that is a syntax error. So now what we have here is we still have an error here, the exception that I told you that we must handle, you remember? So this opening up a connection to the database, you must try and catch SQL exception, but we are not going to handle the exception. What I mean, we are not going to try catch it here. We are going to throw this exception to whoever is going to call this method, so that of course is going to be a class that has to do with the view, so that we can handle the exception and present the exception if any will actually be thrown at all, so that the user can see what is wrong. We can like say, okay, there's an error in the application, there's a database error, and we also, the developers, can know what's going on. So it's not good to catch the exception here, but we need to just throw it into whoever will call it. So I'll simply click on this and then add throws clause for Java SQL exception, and then you can see it has added the throws clause for the SQL exception. So that's it for this method. So I'm gonna save my work, and hopefully, yes, it has compiled. Then I go over to salesdo.java, And in the insert sales record, what we're going to do here, and we are going to open up a connection by calling that method we just wrote, this get database connection from database DAO. So we'll call that to open up a connection here, create a statement here, use the statement to execute an SQL query, and then get the results from the execution of that SQL query. Then we can use that result to determine whether the sales record has been inserted or not. So we're not going to do that in this video. We are going to do that on the next video. So for now, I hope you found this informative, and thanks for viewing. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.